Hey guys, Fiona here. All right, so today we're gonna look at Unit 4, Notes 8's polynomial inequalities. You're really gonna like these, kind of straightforward. The only thing that some of you really dislike is the fact that sometimes you're gonna have to factor, and if you're like, nope, I don't wanna factor at all, go ahead and use quadratic formula for everything. So here's your steps you're gonna go. You wanna make sure that you are equal to or greater than or equal to less than, because these are inequalities, so you're gonna see those signs. But basically you want it to be equal to 0. You want 0 on one side. Okay, that's what number 1 is saying. Make sure that you have this function equal to 0. Okay, 2 then, you are gonna go ahead and you are gonna solve to find your boundary points. Basically your boundary points, when you're solving, it's when you're factoring and solving for x, or when you're using quadratic formula to find your x. So you're gonna find your usually 2, sometimes more, solutions, and those are going to end up being your boundary points. You are then going to stick those boundary points on a number line, and then you are going to test values in between each of those boundary points, okay? Basically, what you're looking for is whatever your sign is. So if you had your function greater than 0, then you're looking for the intervals that are positive. If you had your function less than 0, then you're looking for your intervals that are negative, okay? And that's just logic. Like if I want my function to be greater than 0, those are numbers that are positive, right? Numbers greater than 0 are positive. The last thing you're gonna do is write your solution set as a set of intervals that satisfy the given inequality. So basically it's gonna look like your domain in, when we were writing domains out. So let's look at this first example here, okay? First things first, I need to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract my 15 from both sides. So I'm gonna have 2x squared plus x minus 15 greater than 0. So I am looking at an f of x greater than 0. So that tells me I'm going to be looking for these positive numbers. Okay, so I need to factor this or use quadratic formula first. Well, this one I know that I can factor. It's going to be 2x and x. Multiplies to 15 is going to give me -5 and 3. If I were to FOIL this back out, I would get -5x positive 6x, which would give me the 1x that I would need. So I'm going to pretend like this is equal to 0 for a second, and I'm going to solve for x. So x for this first parenthesis would be add the 5 over, divide by the 2. And then x for the second parenthesis would be subtract the 3 over. So my two boundary points are 5/2 and -3. So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna set those on a number line now. Okay, so here's my number line, my -3, my 5/2, same thing as 2.5. So I'm gonna go into my calculator and I'm gonna pick a number on each side here. Okay, so I'm gonna pick a number over here. I'm gonna pick a number over here in the middle, and I pick a number over here, and I'm gonna plug each of those in. So I'm gonna plug a -4 in first into this original equation, okay? So I'm gonna have 2 times -4 squared plus a -4 minus 15. And I'm gonna plug that in and I'm gonna see what ends up happening if I get a positive number or a negative number. So plug it into your calculator just like you see it. I end up getting a positive number. Then I'm gonna pick a number in between. I'm gonna try 0 because a number between -3 and 2.5, 0 works. So I'm gonna 2 times 0 squared plus 0 minus 15. If I plug that in, I'm going to end up with a negative number. Then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug 3 in. So 2 times 3 squared plus 3 minus 15. That's going to give me a positive number. So remember, right away in the beginning, I was looking for those positive numbers. So I want this side, and I want this side. And because I don't have the equal to part underneath my sign, I can't equal, so that's going to be an open parenthesis instead of the bracket. So if I were to write this out, the intervals I'm looking at are -infinity to -3, not included, and not included 2.5 to infinity. And that would be my final answer. So let's go ahead and look at number 2. Again, I need to be equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract the 20 from both sides. So I'm going to have x squared minus x minus 20 greater than 0. So I'm still looking at that f of x greater than 0. So I'm still looking for those positive numbers. So I'm going to factor. I know that this is x and x. I know that I can get a -5 and a +4. And that's going to pretend like we're equal to 0 so that I can solve. So x would equal 5 and x is going to equal -4. We're going to put those boundary points on. So -4 and 5. So we're going to pick a number on this side. I don't know, let's do -3. So I'm going to do -3 squared minus -3 minus 20. If I plug that in, I get a positive number. And here I could plug 0 in, so I'm going to get 0 squared minus 0 minus 20. I would end up with a negative number. And then over here, let's say I plug in 6. Okay, it doesn't matter. You can plug in any number that would be over there. So I'd get 6 squared minus 6 minus 20, and I would end up with a positive number again. So because I'm looking for those positive numbers, I am going to be looking for this side and this side. Again, I am not equal to, so these are going to be open brackets. So if I'm writing that out, I'm going to have -infinity to -4 not included, and 5 not included to infinity. Okay. Let's look at another example here. We are going to go and get this equal to 0. So I'm going to have 4x squared plus 2x minus 1 less than or equal to 0. So I'm looking at f of x less than or equal to 0. Okay, so that's actually telling me I'm looking at the negative numbers. So I could go and I could try to factor this, but guess what, you guys, you can't. Okay, it's not going to work out. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do quadratic formula. So opposite of b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. When I do this, I get x equals 0.31 and x equals -0.81. So those are my boundary points. So I'm going to plug in -0.81 and 0.31, and we're going to find a number from each position. So if I plug in a -1 here, I'm going to get 4 times -1 squared plus 2 times -1 minus 1. I end up getting a positive number. Plug in 0 in, so 4 times 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 1. I'm going to get a negative number. And let's say we just plug 1 in, so 4 times 1 squared plus 2 times 1 minus 1, I end up with a positive number. So we care about when our function has those negative numbers. So I care about in between here now, that little spot there. And guess what? I have the equal to underneath that sign. So this is going to be a bracket situation where I'm going from -0.81 to 0.31. Okay, so number 4 is going to be similar to number 3. Again, you're going to have to use that quadratic formula. Let's go ahead and look at number 5 now, because this looks a little bit different because I have an x to the third. Okay, so I still need to be equal to 0, so I'm going to move that 4x and that 4 over. So I'm going to have x to the third plus x squared minus 4x minus 4 less than or equal to 0. So I'm looking at f of x less than or equal to 0, so I'm looking at those negative numbers again. Okay. Remember, when you have an x to the third, more than likely you can try to factor by grouping. So I know that these two things have an x squared in common, and these two things have a -4. So my first parenthesis is going to be x squared minus 4, and my second one's going to be whenever I divide this out, I'm going to be left with x plus 4. Okay, and that came from dividing the second one out. I'm going to factor even further because I have something squared and I can factor that. It gets me x plus 2. Oops, sorry. I made a mistake. This should be x plus 1. X plus 1. So x plus 2, x minus 2, x plus 1. And we're going to pretend like that's equal to 0 for a second so we can find our factors. So x is going to equal -2, x is going to equal 2, and x is going to equal -1. And those are my boundary points. So I have -2, -1, and 2. And we're going to plug these this spot, this number, a number in here, and a number in here. So we're going to do 4 different ones that we're going to plug in now. So I could plug in -3 into that original. So I'm going to do -3 to the third plus -3 squared minus 4 times -3. I apologize for sniffing in your ears. Minus 4. If I do that, I'm going to get a negative number. Plug in a number between -2 and -1. So you're going to have to do -1.5. Plug that in. I'm going to get a positive number. Plugging in a number between -1 and 2. I'm going to plug in 0. I'm going to get a negative number. And then plug in a number bigger than 2, I'm going to get a positive number. So because I'm looking for when the function is less than 0, I'm looking for those negative spots. So I'm looking at here and I'm looking at here. I have that extra equal to, so I'm going to have brackets on all of them. So if I would write that out, I'd get -infinity to -2 included, and -1 to 2 both included. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes a little bit of sense. If you have any questions, reach out to me via Schoology. I might not answer right away, but I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can.